And hello and welcome to season 2, episode 14 of the QCast. And this is one that I am extremely excited about because it's that time of year, folks. We're in the nitty gritty. It's NCAA tournament time. We can feel it. We had regional ranking number 1 today, and no better guest to have on the QCast at this moment than the chairman of the Men's Basketball National Committee, Mike Schauer. Mike, we talked on November 8th. You know, it was still football season out. It didn't really feel like hoop season quite yet, even though it was. But here we are in the heart of it, my friend. And your committee got regional ranking number 1 out today. It's got to be a pretty exciting time for you and your team.
Yeah, no question, Bob. I think as I reflect on that conversation, it felt like it was going to be a little while until we were sitting here talking about the first regional rankings, the first official and public rankings. But here we are, and you're right. For those of us who have been around D3, the last couple of years have been difficult and disappointing. And so this time of year is always exciting. It's always exciting to get the regional rankings out there and start to look towards what could become the national tournament. But I think this year adds a little bit of excitement given the length of time since we've published a ranking and the length of time since we've conducted and concluded a championship.
And let me just say on behalf of D3 Hoops fans, Mike, you know, the transparency from you and your committee is incredible and commendable. You reached out to do this interview. You were on Hoopsville last week. You've sent me ideas on other things we can do as rankings come out. And you know, I just think that for people that are looking to understand the process, for you guys, not only meeting them halfway in the middle here, but going to all these lengths to make sure that this is all out there, that seems like a very intentional idea on your end. Talk a little bit about the transparency that you and your committee have brought to this.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Bob. I would say that the committee has 2 goals. The primary goal, Bob, is obviously to select the most deserving 20 at-large bid teams in the country based upon criteria. And at the end of the day, that's the primary goal. And then to certainly put together a bracket that is representative, is as national a bracket as we can put together, and have a great tournament. That's goal number 1. But really underneath that is just a desire to try to include people in the process. Let people experience as much as we can about the conversations that take place, some of the things we're going to do along the way that helps us prepare for the regional rankings. We'll talk about a few of those things here before our time's up. So I appreciate that, Bob. And I've said this to you every time we talk. You can tell people I'm always available. My number's listed on our website. My cell phone's there. A few people have taken me up on that and said, you know what, I'm going to call him. And I've obviously got my day job going, so I've got to focus on that from time to time, but certainly want to be available to people. If they've got questions or comments or concerns, I'm available. We're not dealing with national security secrets here. I say it all the time. I'm comfortable with disagreement. People don't have to agree with what the committee decided or my opinion on something. I'm comfortable with conversation, but I just want to be available. And if people want to be involved in the process as much as we can, that would be great.
And as someone that wants him to do his day job really poorly for the next week or so, I encourage you guys to go to the Wheaton website and call this guy because he's asking you to, and any kind of attention he takes away from the next few days would be great for me. I'll leave that there. But Mike, in all seriousness, you got regional ranking number 1 out today. It's different because the first version it's a kind of a trial here to do this alphabetically. To me, it makes a complete sense why you did this, but let's recap. We talked about this on November 8th. Why is this first ranking listed alphabetically and not numerically?
Yeah, again, it's really simple. And it's because, as you know, and if people are following, there are 5 primary criteria and then a handful of secondary criteria, but really 1 primarily that we use, which is the non-conference strength of schedule. But of that 5 primary criteria, 1 of them is results against regionally ranked opponents. And they don't exist until we do one of these rankings. And so what gets difficult previously when we put them in order is we put them in order without the totality of the criteria. And in essence, Bob, by doing that, we really set up a false foundation, a false narrative, because the first ranking numerically that we used to do didn't have one of the primary criteria in it. So we decided to do the first one alphabetically, so as to simply say we don't really know the order yet, and let the first time we put them in order numerically to include the regionally ranked results. And I will say this, Bob, after doing the rankings this week, I am more committed to the alphabetical regional ranking initially than I was before,
Right.
because it's very difficult with limited criteria to put teams in order numerically to begin with. But as we'll talk about, the number of regionally ranked wins and the number of teams that have them have gone up. And so if we had put them in numeric order, this year would have actually been more disruptive to those numeric numbers than previous years, because we have so many more regionally ranked teams. So I'm really, I know some people have struggles with it, and I'll be really candid with you, Bob. The people that have struggled with it have never been a part of the conversation where you're trying to put a team in order without all the criteria. And so I think our committee would go, man, are we thankful this first one's alphabetical? And with the hope that the regional rankings, when they come out, or the regionally ranked results, when they become public and come out, will help us sort of sort through the numeric ranking more easily.
So in other words, if you look at two resumes that have the same winning percentage and strength of schedule, if someone was, 0.800 winning percentage and their 550 strength of schedule, if someone has, 1-1 regionally ranked, that's different than someone that's 4-4 regionally ranked. That's just, they would get ordered differently. And you don't have that. You have no way to have that until there is a regional ranking. And so that's why this is such an important thing. And let's circle back. Is there a chance moving forward to move this alphabetical ranking up a week so people kind of get to see an ordered ranking a couple times before Selection Sunday? Is that on the table still?
Yeah, so those are conversations that are certainly happening. So one, Bob, the alphabetical ranking may completely go away. That may be a one-year trial, because obviously every other sports committee is using it, and there may be simply no momentum for it. I would believe we should keep it. That's my personal opinion. I think there's value in it, as I've stated. I think it cleans up the process. I think it improves the likelihood we get it right as we go forward. But I also agree that I hadn't thought about the critique that we're losing a ranking when we did it. I think that's a fair critique, as I said in November. So it's certainly conversations of moving it forward. But as you know, Bob, nothing happens in a sports-specific way. So that would also have to be universally accepted by other sports committees to do it. So where this all goes, Bob, I'm not really sure, because it will be decided certainly well above the men's basketball committee. And quite candidly, when it gets decided, I will just be doing my day job and will be done as chair. So, but I think those conversations are happening.
I don't know how much you follow things either on social media or chat boards or whatever, but I'm kind of blown away nowadays at how much conversation is out there about the real criteria. People having conversations about winning percentage and SOS and RROs. And are you aware of how much dialogue goes on around this stuff? And does it kind of blow you away?
I am aware of it. Yeah. And I think I try to follow it, more to just get a sense of maybe some of what are people wondering about? What questions do people have? Kind of where are the areas that if they wanted to, I could shed a little bit of clarity and light onto. So yeah, I absolutely follow it. No question.
Good. It's a different ranking this year because there's more teams being ranked. Last year, there were 8 regions, or I guess 2 years ago, there were 8 regions, and I believe it was 68 total teams ranked. Now there are 10 regions, and I think it's 83 teams ranked. What have been your learnings throughout the early going here of the difference of having more teams ranked on the criteria and kind of where the bar is to get regionally ranked?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would broadly say, and this is an opinion on my part, I think we're ranking too many teams. I think we've gotten to the point now we're ranking 20% of the country, which is roughly the 83 teams. And to be honest, as a result of that, I personally think being regionally ranked should be a little bit more prestigious than maybe the top 20% of the country gets ranked. And it also then waters down slightly the value of having a regionally ranked win, because more people are regionally ranked. And it simply means, and people can do this without me having to suggest it, when you look at the resumes we are now comparing, while still good teams, those resumes are not as strong, both in terms of the potential winning percentage and strength of schedule, that they were in the past. And so the quote unquote bottom of the regions, if you will, which are still, again, good teams, those resumes are not quite as strong. So the winning percentage has come down, obviously, as has the strength of schedule. What is going to go up, Bob, and what I'm not quite sure by how much or what that's going to look like, is obviously more teams are regionally ranked, thus more teams are going to have regionally ranked wins. So when we talked in November, I suggested you needed maybe 2 or 3 regionally ranked wins to really have a resume that was strong, along with the winning percentage and SOS. I don't think the winning percentage or SOS is going to change very much. I think those are going to stay somewhat standard. But I think the number of regionally ranked wins it's going to take to be a serious Pool C candidate is probably going to go up. By how much, I don't know. I think we're going to kind of learn that as we go. But it is going to be up from 2 to 3 to probably, in the 4 range, somewhere in there. And the other thing, Bob, the committee is really going to have to do now is discern how valuable are these regionally ranked wins, because the best regionally ranked wins versus the quote unquote worst regionally ranked wins is going to be a pretty big gap between, beating one of the, 2 or 3 or 4 best resumes in the country and beating the 81st best resume in the country. That's really different. And so I think the committee is going to have to do a pretty good job of discerning how good are these regionally ranked wins, because we're going to be comparing teams with 3, 4, 5 regionally ranked wins, and we've got to be able to kind of determine the true value of those wins. I think that's going forward going to be a question for those of you that follow along and for those of us who are in the room to really wrestle with. And I don't know that I exactly know what that's going to look like or how that's going to play out, but it's something that we certainly on the committee are keeping an eye on.
Just to recap where we talked about in November, you gave us some historical averages of Pool C selection. So if every year there's, like this year, there's 20 Pool C bids, that number hasn't always been the same. It's 18, it's 21, but you gave us some averages. I think that the numbers were something like winning percentage 780, SOS 550, 2 or more, 2-ish regionally ranked wins. And that's wins, not total games played, but wins. What you're saying is, now that there's 83 teams ranked, the number that's probably changing there of the 3 of those, instead of it being 2 RRO wins, it's probably more like 3, if not a little more than that. Am I hearing you correctly?
100%. And so what that number is, Bob, I'm hesitant to say, because I think in real time, we're all sort of experiencing the impact of the 10 regions and the 83 teams together, because none of us have done it. And so I'm hesitant to say the number, but, I would put it at, if I had to sort of handicap it at this point, I'd put it at 3.5, something in that range. Under, a 3 number, those had better be really good wins, would be my sense. 4 and above, you're probably starting to get into a competitive resume, assuming the other criteria is strong. That's my guess. We'll see how it plays out. But just looking at, when you just simply count up the regionally ranked wins, which you can obviously do once we put out the rankings, you can count up how many regionally ranked wins teams have. And there's quite a few teams that are already at 4 regionally ranked wins after the first week. So that those numbers are going to stay steady and or go up a little bit.
For fans that want to follow this, there's a couple people that do a great job of managing their own numbers. Matt Snyder, so he's at, let's see, Forever Faithful to Maroon and Gold, at FFMAG, whatever that turns out to. He has already put the regionally ranked records on his site, which is awesome. So go out there and you'll see that, like, I think Oshkosh has 8 of these things and Platteville has 7, etc. He's already got them on his site. I'll make sure to tweet Matt's stuff. Drew Pasteur, which is at D3 Bubble, also does some numbers and he uses calculations to do his own rankings. So just throwing out there for fans that want to see the impact now of having the RROs in there, you can go look at that from those guys. By the way, are you aware that there's people out there doing their own kind of prognostications and things? Is that something that the committee is aware of?
I can't speak for the committee. I'm aware of it. So yeah, maybe I'm not supposed to admit I'm paying attention to that. It doesn't impact what I'm doing, but I'm curious.
That's very cool. A couple times in this conversation, I want to ask you some just questions that come up, kind of like break some myths, get your opinion. this is something I threw out there a couple of weeks ago, which was, is the UAA at an advantage because their teams are ranked across so many multiple regions? In other words, in the WIAC, all of the WIAC teams are in region 9. They're all in region 9. So they start to then compete with Augsburg and St. Thomas and Wartburg and whoever else. But in the UAA, they're on the table in all these different regions, so Rochester's over in, what is it, 3, and Wash U is in 8, and Carnegie Mellon and Case are in 7. It's at Brandeis is in 2, blah, blah, blah. Is that an advantage for the UAA to be in all these regions and get teams ranked and then have more RROs because the teams get ranked? True, false?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer that in a broadly and then come down to your specific question, because really one of the questions is, are there parts of the criteria or the process that creates disadvantages in certain circumstances? So to just talk about the potential advantage of the UAA, without mentioning some of the other advantages of the criteria, I want to be careful there. But broadly speaking, I think there is an advantage for the UAA to be in multiple regions. And the simple reason is there is no way for other leagues, Illinois Wesleyan and Wheaton, to use the two schools represented here, could ever be on the table together. Right? We couldn't be on the selection table together, but in theory, Rochester and Emory could be. And so they don't have to get ranked against each other. Now, so there's a little bit of advantage there. But I don't think I have a solution for that, because to put them all in the same region creates a tremendous disadvantage for the region you put them in. And what I mean by that is, so Chicago and Wash U are in region 8. They're in our region, but they're close enough for me to go play them if I want to. And we play Chicago almost every year. Illinois Wesleyan often plays Wash U and usually plays Chicago as well. But if Brandeis were also in our region, we couldn't really go play them. And so don't know that putting them in the same region really solves it, but there's a little bit of an advantage to being spread out. My point being, though, is I think it's dangerous to point out that advantage and not point out the criteria also favors teams that are in Division III populous locations. So Wheaton is in a very populous Division III area in the Midwest. So in 3 hours from me, there's probably 3 or 4 regions now represented. And so I can go play a lot of different regions. I can go play a lot of different regionally ranked opponents without ever really expanding my budget. There are schools in Division III who barely have another conference opponent 3 hours away, much less a non-conference opponent. So there is the process, and criteria has some advantages. So to simply point out the UAA advantages without acknowledging that Wheaton has some advantages that Pomona Pitzer or a Whitman doesn't have, I think would be a little unfair to the question. So my answer is yes, but there are other advantages the criteria and process create in addition to that one.
And then the geographic isolation piece would be kind of question 2 along that front. I've been involved in some Twitter banter this week with my friend Greg, and Greg has some very good points. I don't think he's making his case the right way, so I'm going to try to help him with that. There certainly are disadvantages, Mike, when you look at teams like Whitworth, Pomona Pitzer, Claremont Mudscripts, Whitman, the teams that are way out there, and they're disadvantaged 2 fronts. Let me ask you about this. First, if these RROs are like gold chips, that was your term from last time, you got to have, let's say, 3.5 of them. It's a lot harder for those teams way out west to play games that lead to those. Would you agree with that?
No question. And I think anybody that would suggest that isn't true just really isn't paying attention. Of course it's true. It's much easier for Wheaton to play non-conference regionally ranked opponents than it is for Whitworth.
Is there any fix to that, Mike? Like, is there any, I don't know what and again, we're not here to solve for that, but is there anything you guys have ever talked about where you kind of adjust something or you try to solve for that imbalance?
Yeah, not as directly as that, because again, we're really dealing with a Division III problem, not specifically a men's basketball problem, although, because it's really experienced across the board for those programs. Yeah, I mean, Bob, the truth of the matter is we have a system set up, for better or worse, that is really a regionalized criteria trying to create a national tournament. And so we've kind of got to accept that the criteria is really a regionalized criteria. It is really designed to compare Wheaton to University of Chicago. It is more cumbersome and more difficult to compare Babson and Whitworth. And so those schools that are isolated, that the criteria does not really answer those questions. So my answer is that is I'm sympathetic and empathetic to the problem. There's not an easy solution out of it. It is what it is. And so there is a disadvantage to being a isolated Division III institution, as opposed to those of us who are in much more D3 populous areas.
And then the final question on that front is around bracketing. And we're going to get into bracketing in just a second. But in terms of the West Coast teams and Texas and anyone else that's in an island of sorts, there is a very tough setup in that those teams very rarely would get a chance to host like the second weekend, the sectionals as we call them. They're often in very difficult first round positions. First of all, am I saying that correctly, in that there's a bracketing challenge that's caused by financial constraints?
100% correct. Yep, we are limited. The last time when we talked, I suggested that it was limited to 5. The truth is there is no specific limit. There is sort of a historical average of 5. But we are very conscious of, particularly in the early couple of rounds when we can sort of project it. Obviously, once teams start playing, you can't necessarily guarantee that you're not going to create some flights because of who wins or upsets or that sort of stuff. But yes, there's no question that the financial limitations, we're given a budget that we kind of have to try to operate within, that reduces the likelihood, if not completely eliminates the probability, that we are going to fly 3 teams to Whitworth to play in the sectional rounds. That's just not likely, as opposed to just flying Whitworth to someplace that we can drive 2 other teams to because of cost. And that's just the reality of it. It's just the reality of it.
And that's important. It's really acknowledged by all. And like you said, the regional nature of the tournament, the regional nature of the national tournament, it's really spelled out in the manual. It sort of says that. It kind of, without saying these words, it says, this is going to be a little bit flawed, but this is how we do this. And it's there's financial considerations. Division III philosophy comes in. And so I just wanted to ask you about those, because this time of year, those are hot button issues. And I understand it. I understand if you're a fan of like Pomona Pitzer and you're sitting there like, well, where are we going to get sent? You're thinking that this system is stacked against you. And what you're saying is there's definitely some disadvantages when you're out there, and it is what it is, right?
Correct. Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about Pool C, if we would. So this year, there are 20 Pool C teams, and Pool C is an at-large bid. So you've got 44 teams are going to get in via their automatic qualifier. The UAA is the only conference that has no conference tournament. So whoever wins the regular season, and if it's a tie, it goes to their own tiebreakers. Someone's going to win the AQ in the UAA. 43 other leagues have a conference tournament. I believe it's all 43 other. And in those leagues, the AQ is going to come down to who wins the conference tournament. Then you get 20 Pool C bids at large. Talk us through the process. How do you guys go about picking these 20 Pool C teams?
Yes, you're talking the Selection Sunday, sort of the weekend that we go through.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, it's kind of neat. There's sort of the executive group of the national committee. Actually, we're in Indianapolis when this, and basically on Saturday and Sunday, we're watching games as you would see on TV. We have multiple screens. We're watching conference tournament, championship games, kind of starting to anticipate the if then statements, if this happens, that sort of stuff. Then Sunday morning we'll do our rack call, and we will put together our final regional ranking. And once that is done and the national committee sort of confirms it or makes some adjustments that they feel comfortable, then on Sunday, sometime on Sunday, depending upon how long that takes us, we start to select teams. And it's really just this simple. There's 10 regions. They're ranked 1 through whatever. Obviously, your first place team could be an automatic qualifier and have an AQ, and so they would already be in the tournament. And so you go down to wherever you have your first ranked team that needs an at-large bid, and basically there are 10 teams, quote unquote, on the table. And we start to compare and contrast those 10 resumes, select a team to get into the tournament. From that region, the next available team comes up to the table, and you sort of start the process all over again. In essence, until we have picked the 20 at-large bid teams. Early in the process, Bob, you can anticipate it goes pretty quick, right? Because you sort of know, and this won't be a surprise, but if we ended today, whoever needed it from Platteville or Oshkosh is going to go in pretty quick, right? So there are teams that are very obvious from the get-go, and so the first few rounds go very quickly. As we get later in the process and we're picking those last 4 or 5 teams, the discussion becomes a bit more intense, and the comparison gets a little more narrow because there's just nuanced differences there. In all probability, you have lost a head-to-head. There usually isn't one, sometimes, but not very much. And or you have very limited or no results against common opponents. So you're really comparing, and this is where those regionally ranked wins really become important, because they're often a tiebreaker, because you assume if they're at this point, they have a pretty good win-loss percentage, they have a pretty strong strength of schedule. And so it really comes down to who did they beat and how quality are those wins. And so that conversation gets, it can become lengthy as we pick those last teams. And Bob, the weight of what we're doing, you can feel in the conversation, because we know as we're going through the process and we select 17, 18, 19, we get to 20, we know that there's 21, 22, 23 are going to be very disappointed. The gap between how we picked them is very small, but the result is absolute, meaning one team gets to go, one team does not get to go. But the difference between the two was probably pretty thin. And so we feel the weight